What happened at your school that still does not feel real? The email notification pinged on my phone at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, 3 days before graduation. I almost didn't check it. I was already in bed, mentally preparing for my valedictorian speech that I'd been rewriting for the 5th time. But something about the sender name made me pause. Henderson, Margaret FWD, Re, Sarachin application review. Mrs. Henderson never emailed me this late. Actually, she barely emailed me at all anymore, not since the rejection letters started piling up in March. I clicked it open, expecting maybe some last-minute graduation paperwork or a reminder about cap and gown pickup. Instead, I found myself staring at a forwarded email chain that made my stomach drop through the floor. From Margaret.Henderson@lincolnhigh.edu to admissions@stanford.edu. Subject, Re, Sarachin application review, additional counselor input. Dear Admissions Committee. Thank you for reaching out regarding Ms. Chen's application. While her academic record appears impressive on paper, I feel obligated to share some concerns that have developed during her senior year. I sat up so fast my laptop nearly slid off my comforter. This email was dated February 15th, right when I'd submitted my Stanford application. My hands were shaking as I scrolled down to see more messages in the chain, all from Mrs. Henderson to different admissions offices. Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Yale. Every single school that had rejected me. Significant behavioral issues. Questions about academic integrity. Tendency toward aggressive confrontation with staff. Concerns about her ability to handle collegiate social pressures. Each email was like a knife twisting deeper. These weren't just lies, they were calculated, specific character assassinations designed to make admissions officers second-guess everything else in my application. And at the bottom of each message was Mrs. Henderson's professional signature, complete with her credentials and 23 years of experience as a guidance counselor. The forwarded email wasn't even meant for me. I could see from the header that Mrs. Henderson had accidentally sent this to me instead of someone named S. Chen, probably her daughter Sophie's boyfriend Sam, whose last name I suddenly remembered was Chen too. A stupid, careless mistake that had just blown up her entire scheme. I scrolled through 17 different emails spanning from January to April. 17 schools. 17 detailed character assassinations. All while Mrs. Henderson had been sitting across from me in her office, tissues at the ready, consoling me about my surprising string of rejections and suggesting I consider community college as a perfectly valid option. These things happen, Sarah, she'd said just last week, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Sometimes the competition is just too fierce, even for students like you. Students like me. I'd been valedictorian for 3 years running. I had a 4.0 GPA, perfect SAT scores, varsity debate captain, NHS president, and over 400 hours of volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. I'd been featured in the local newspaper twice for academic achievements. Harvard had been sending me recruitment material since sophomore year. And now I knew why none of that had mattered. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through my contacts until I found Sophie Henderson's Instagram. Sure enough, there she was in her latest post from 2 hours ago, Stanford bound. Can't believe I got into my dream school with scholarship. #grateful, #cardinal red, #blessed. The same Stanford that had rejected me in March. The same scholarship I'd been competing for. My phone showed 11:52 p.m. In 73 hours, I'd be walking across that graduation stage. Mrs. Henderson would probably be there, watching me deliver my valedictorian speech, knowing exactly what she'd stolen from me. But she'd made one crucial mistake. Now I had proof. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk with 3 monitors open, my laptop, my phone, and my mom's old tablet, cross-referencing every detail in those emails with my rejection letters. The timestamps matched perfectly. Stanford's rejection came exactly 6 days after Mrs. Henderson's February 15th email. Harvard's rejection followed her February 22nd character assassination by 8 days. MIT, Princeton, Yale, the pattern was identical every single time. By 3 a.m., I had screenshots of everything saved in 4 different locations, including a cloud drive Mrs. Henderson didn't know existed. By 4 a.m., I'd started a spreadsheet tracking dates, recipients, and specific lies she'd told about me. The woman had been thorough, I'd give her that. She'd crafted different concerns for different schools, like she knew exactly which character flaws would resonate with each admissions committee. For MIT, she'd questioned my collaborative skills and suggested I was overly competitive to the detriment of peer relationships. For Yale, she'd implied I had anxiety issues that might affect my academic performance under pressure. For Harvard, she'd straight up suggested I might have cheated on standardized tests, despite having zero evidence. The cruelest part wasn't even the lies themselves. It was how perfectly she'd positioned herself as a concerned counselor, reluctantly sharing confidential observations that painted her as professional and caring. She'd even ended each email with phrases like, "I hope this additional context is helpful in your evaluation process, and please feel free to contact me if you need any clarification on these concerns." At 6:15 a.m., I heard my parents start moving around downstairs. The coffee maker beeped. Dad turned on the morning news. Mom started her usual routine of packing lunches and checking the weather. Normal Wednesday morning sounds from a family that had no idea their daughter's entire future had been systematically destroyed by someone they trusted for 4 years. I thought about telling them, but what would I say? "Hey Mom, remember how you cried when I got rejected from Harvard? Well, turns out my guidance counselor has been sabotaging me for months so her daughter could steal my scholarship." It sounded insane even in my head. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Jenna, "Coffee before first period? You looked stressed yesterday." Stressed. Right. If she only knew. I started typing a response, then stopped. How many people knew? Mrs. Henderson couldn't have been working completely alone. Someone had to help coordinate the lies, especially the ones about my behavior in classes she'd never observed. Which teachers had she talked to? Which administrators were in on this? Another thought hit me like ice water. What if this wasn't just about me? I pulled up the school's college acceptance list from last year and started cross-referencing it with the guidance counselor assignments. Mrs. Henderson handled approximately 60 seniors each year. Out of those, only 12 had gotten into top-tier schools in the past 3 years. But here's what made my blood run cold. 8 of those 12 acceptances had gone to students whose parents worked for the district or were major donors to the school foundation, including 3 other mysterious rejections of high-performing students who'd been assigned to Mrs. Henderson. Students who'd been direct competition for the same scholarships that district employees' kids had ultimately received. My hand started shaking again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from rage. This wasn't just about Sophie Henderson getting into Stanford. This was about a systematic corruption scheme that had been going on for years, and I'd just stumbled into the evidence that could bring down the entire network. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I made it through exactly 2 periods before I snapped. It happened in AP Government, ironically during Mrs. Patterson's lecture about ethical leadership and public accountability. She was going on about how trust in institutions depends on individuals acting with integrity, and I just sat there staring at my desk, thinking about Mrs. Henderson's fake concerned voice saying these things happen, Sarah, while she'd been actively destroying my future for months. When the bell rang, I didn't head to lunch like everyone else. Instead, I walked straight to the main office. Is Mrs. Henderson available? I asked the secretary, Mrs. Valdez, trying to keep my voice steady. She's at lunch, honey. Can I take a message? No, I'll wait. I sat in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs for 37 minutes, my phone burning a hole in my pocket with all the screenshots. Students filtered in and out, kids picking up hall passes, parents signing their children out early, normal Wednesday afternoon chaos. None of them had any idea they were sitting 20 feet from someone who'd just uncovered the biggest scandal in Lincoln High's history. At 12:43, Mrs. Henderson walked through the door carrying a Panera bag and her usual oversized coffee cup. She looked exactly the same as always, navy cardigan, sensible flats, that practiced smile she used with students and parents. When she saw me, her expression didn't even flicker. Sarah. What a nice surprise. Come on back to my office. I followed her down the familiar hallway, past the college pennants hanging on the walls. Stanford. Harvard. Yale. All the schools that had rejected me because of the woman walking in front of me. Her office looked exactly the same too, motivational posters about reaching your dreams, a bookshelf full of college guides, and that framed photo of Sophie in her debate team uniform. What can I do for you, sweetheart? She settled behind her desk, unwrapping what looked like a turkey sandwich. Everything okay with your graduation speech? I know you've been working so hard on it. The casual concern in her voice made my skin crawl. I pulled out my phone and set it on her desk, the forwarded email thread open on the screen. I think you sent me something by mistake last night. The change in her face was immediate. The color drained from her cheeks, and her hand froze halfway to her sandwich. For about 10 seconds, we just stared at each other in complete silence. Sarah, she started, then stopped. I watched her eyes dart to her computer screen, probably calculating how badly she'd screwed up. That email was taken out of context. You don't understand the full situation. Really? I leaned forward. Because I understand that you sent character assassination letters to 17 different colleges. I understand that you lied about behavioral issues I don't have, academic integrity problems that don't exist, and social concerns you completely fabricated. I understand that your daughter got into Stanford with the scholarship I should have received. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then something shifted in her expression, the fake motherly concern disappeared, replaced by something much colder. You need to be very careful about making accusations you can't prove, Sarah. Can't prove? I almost laughed. I have screenshots of everything. Timestamps, email headers, the entire chain of correspondence. I've already uploaded copies to 3 different cloud accounts. Mrs. Henderson's face went pale again, but this time there was something else there. Fear, maybe. Or desperation. What do you want? She asked quietly. That's when I realized I held all the power now. And I had less than 60 hours to decide what to do with it. The question hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. What did I want? 24 hours ago, I would have said I wanted to get into Harvard. 12 hours ago, I would have said I wanted justice. But sitting there, watching Mrs. Henderson's carefully constructed facade crumble in real time, I realized I wanted something much more complicated. I wanted my future back. And I wanted to make sure she never did this to another student again. I want you to call every single admissions office, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Today. I want you to send corrective letters explaining that your previous communications contained factual errors. I want you to recommend me for late admission consideration and tell them you made a mistake. Mrs. Henderson shook her head slowly. Sarah, you don't understand how this works. It's May. These schools have already finalized their incoming classes, sent out housing assignments, collected deposits. I can't just. You can try, I cut her off. Or I can take these emails to Principal Morrison, the school board, and the state education department. Your choice. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, there was something desperate in her eyes that made my stomach turn. There are things you don't know, she said quietly. About the situation with the college recommendations. Enlighten me. Mrs. Henderson glanced at her door, then leaned forward and lowered her voice. Sophie didn't just get into Stanford on her own merit. The scholarship she received, it's funded by a grant program that requires a certain number of recipients from specific demographic categories. Local students, first-generation college attendees, children of public service employees. I stared at her. Are you seriously trying to justify this? I'm trying to explain that Sophie qualified for resources you didn't. Your parents are both engineers, Sarah. Your family income is in the top 10% of our district. You have advantages Sophie never had. The audacity of it made me dizzy. So you decided to level the playing field by destroying my applications? I decided to make sure deserving students got opportunities they might not otherwise have. Her voice was getting stronger now, like she was convincing herself this was actually justified. Do you know how many brilliant kids I've watched get passed over because they couldn't afford test prep or college consultants? How many first-generation students never even apply to elite schools because they assume they don't belong there? And Sophie's one of those students? I asked. Because last I checked, guidance counselors make pretty decent money. And didn't she spend last summer at that expensive debate camp in Vermont? Mrs. Henderson's jaw tightened. Sophie worked incredibly hard for everything she's achieved. I'm sure she did. Just like I worked hard for everything you stole from me. My phone buzzed on her desk. A text notification lit up the screen, and I could see Mrs. Henderson's eyes flick to it automatically. The message preview showed Jenna's name. Did you hear about the anonymous tip someone sent to the school board about college admissions? The blood drained from my face. I grabbed my phone and opened the message thread. Apparently someone sent a huge packet of evidence to the district office this morning. Jenna's text continued. My mom works in the main office and she said they're calling an emergency meeting. Something about falsified college recommendations? I looked up at Mrs. Henderson, whose face had gone from pale to gray. That wasn't me, I said quickly. Then who? She started, then stopped. Her eyes widened as the same realization hit both of us simultaneously. I wasn't the only person who'd received that forwarded email last night. Sam Chen, Sophie's boyfriend, the real intended recipient, he'd gotten it too. And unlike me, he'd apparently decided not to confront Mrs. Henderson directly. Mrs. Henderson's hands were shaking now as she reached for her desk phone. I need to call the district office, she mumbled. I need to explain before they... Before they what? I asked. Before they realize you've been running a corruption scheme for years? She froze, her hand hovering over the receiver. How did you? I did my homework, Mrs. Henderson. Just like you taught me to. Outside her office, I could hear the normal sounds of a Wednesday afternoon at Lincoln High. Students laughing in the hallways, teachers making copies, the distant sound of gym class. None of them knew that by tomorrow morning, everything was going to change. And neither Mrs. Henderson nor I had any control over what happened next. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Before I even opened my eyes, I could hear my parents talking in urgent whispers downstairs, the kind of hushed, serious conversation that meant something had gone very wrong. I grabbed my phone. The first text was from Jenna at 6:23 a.m. Sarah. Check the news. Now. The second was from my debate team partner Marcus. Holy shit, did you know about this? The third was from a number I didn't recognize. This is Channel 7 News. We'd like to speak with you about the Lincoln High admissions scandal. My stomach dropped. I pulled up the local news website and there it was, the top story with a headline that made me feel sick. Local guidance counselor suspended amid college admissions fraud allegations. The article was short but devastating. The school district had received substantial evidence of misconduct involving falsified college recommendation letters. Mrs. Henderson had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The district was reviewing potentially dozens of cases dating back 3 years. But here's what made my blood turn to ice. Buried in the third paragraph was a quote from an unnamed source saying the investigation began after a concerned student came forward with documented evidence of systematic fraud. A concerned student. Everyone was going to think it was me. My phone rang, Mom calling from downstairs. Sarah, honey, can you come down here please? We need to talk. I found both my parents sitting at the kitchen table with their laptops open and coffee growing cold in their mugs. Dad looked up when I walked in, his expression unreadable. Did you know about this? Mom asked, turning her screen toward me. She had the news article pulled up, along with what looked like an email from the district superintendent. Know about what, exactly? Sarah. Dad's voice had that tone he used when he was trying very hard to stay calm. We got a call from Principal Morrison at 7 a.m. Apparently your name has come up in connection with this investigation. My heart started pounding. What kind of connection? Mom pulled up another email. The district wants to interview you about your interactions with Mrs. Henderson. They're specifically asking about any conversations you had with her regarding your college applications. I sank into a chair, my mind racing. If they interviewed me, I'd have to tell them about yesterday's confrontation. About the forwarded emails. About everything I'd discovered. And once I did that, there would be no going back, not for Mrs. Henderson, not for Sophie, and probably not for me either. There's something else, Dad said quietly. Channel 7 called the house this morning. They're running a follow-up story tonight about the students who were affected. Morrison said there might be reporters at school today. The room started spinning. Reporters? Apparently this is bigger than just Lincoln High, Mom said, scrolling through her laptop. I found 3 other articles about similar cases in districts across the state. The Department of Education is launching a statewide investigation into guidance counselor misconduct. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Sophie Henderson herself. We need to talk. Meet me at Riverside Park after school. Please. I stared at the message. Sophie and I hadn't spoken directly in over a year, not since we'd stopped being friends freshman year over some stupid drama I couldn't even remember now. The fact that she was reaching out meant she was either desperate or dangerous. Possibly both. Sarah? Mom was looking at me with concern. You're pale. What's wrong? I held up my phone. Sophie Henderson wants to meet. Dad frowned. Absolutely not. You're not getting involved in this mess any more than you already are. But I was already involved. The question was whether I was going to be a victim, a witness, or something else entirely. And I had about 8 hours to figure out which one. I made it through exactly one class before everything went completely sideways. It started in first period AP Literature when Mrs. Garcia pulled me aside after the bell. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Her voice was different, careful, like she was walking through a minefield. Did Mrs. Henderson ever ask you about your interactions with other teachers? Specifically about any difficulties you might have had in your classes? My stomach clenched. What kind of difficulties? Arguments with instructors. Problems with assignments. Anything that might suggest behavioral issues or academic integrity concerns. The phrases were almost identical to the ones I'd read in Mrs. Henderson's emails. Why are you asking me this? Mrs. Garcia glanced around the empty classroom, then closed the door. Because yesterday afternoon, I got a very strange call from the district office. They wanted to know if I'd ever filed any reports about your conduct or academic performance. When I said no, that you've been exemplary for 4 years, they seemed surprised. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They have documentation saying otherwise. How did you? She stopped herself. Sarah, what's going on? Before I could answer, the intercom crackled to life. Sarah Chen to the main office immediately. Sarah Chen to the main office. The walk down the hallway felt like a death march. Students stepped aside as I passed, whispering behind their hands. Word had spread fast, everyone knew about Mrs. Henderson's suspension, and apparently everyone had theories about my involvement. I caught fragments of conversations as I walked, heard she recorded their meetings. Going to sue the school district. Been planning this for months. Principal Morrison was waiting for me with two people I didn't recognize, a woman in a navy suit holding a legal pad and a man with a laptop and what looked like recording equipment. Sarah, this is Ms. Rodriguez from the district office and Mr. Park from the state education department, Morrison said. His usual friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by something formal and distant. They need to ask you some questions about your recent interactions with Mrs. Henderson. Ms. Rodriguez gestured to a chair. This is just a preliminary interview, Sarah. You're not in any trouble, but we need to understand the timeline of events that led to yesterday's revelations. What revelations? I asked, even though I was pretty sure I knew. Mr. Park opened his laptop. We received a substantial amount of documentation early yesterday morning. Email chains, screenshots, and a detailed analysis of what appears to be systematic manipulation of college recommendation letters. The anonymous source indicated that you might have additional information about Mrs. Henderson's conduct. Anonymous source. Sam Chen had really done it. He turned in everything and somehow managed to keep his own name out of it while pointing them straight to me. Sarah, Ms. Rodriguez leaned forward. We know this is difficult, but we have evidence that Mrs. Henderson sent damaging letters to multiple colleges where you'd applied. We also have records showing that you met with her yesterday afternoon, shortly before she submitted her resignation. My head snapped up. She resigned? At 4:47 p.m. yesterday, Mr. Park confirmed. Effective immediately. But her resignation doesn't end our investigation. We still need to understand the full scope of what happened and identify other affected students. The room felt like it was tilting. Mrs. Henderson was gone. After 23 years, she just quit. Which meant she knew exactly how bad this was going to get. How many other students? I asked quietly. Ms. Rodriguez and Mr. Park exchanged glances. We're still determining that, she said carefully. But preliminary evidence suggests this may have affected dozens of applications over multiple years. And Sophie? Her daughter? Ms. Henderson's acceptances are under review, Mr. Park said. Stanford has already contacted us about reassessing her admission status. That's when it hit me. Sophie hadn't just texted me because she was scared. She texted me because her entire future was about to implode, just like mine had 4 months ago. Except now, I was the one holding all the cards. The interview lasted 2 hours and 37 minutes. By the time Mr. Park closed his laptop, I'd told them everything, the forwarded emails, my confrontation with Mrs. Henderson, the pattern of suspicious acceptances I discovered. Everything except the part where Sophie wanted to meet me at Riverside Park. When they finally let me go, it was almost noon and the hallways were buzzing with a different kind of energy. Students clustered around phones, sharing screenshots of news articles and social media posts. Someone had created a hashtag Lincoln High Scandal. It was already trending locally. Sarah. Jenna appeared at my elbow, practically vibrating with excitement. Oh my god, everyone's talking about you. Madison Torres said her mom heard from Mrs. Kim in the district office that there might be criminal charges. Is that true? Are you going to testify? I don't know, I said honestly. I just want to get through graduation. Graduation? Jenna looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Sarah, you might get into Harvard now. This changes everything. Did it? The investigators had mentioned that affected colleges would be contacted, but that didn't mean they'd suddenly have open spots for students they'd rejected 4 months ago. Most schools had already processed housing deposits, registered students for orientation, even assigned roommates. I might have exposed Mrs. Henderson's scheme, but I wasn't naive enough to think that automatically fixed my future. My phone buzzed with another text from Sophie. Please. I know you hate me, but I need to explain. 3:30 at the park. I'll wait until you come. I stared at the message. Sophie Henderson had been my closest friend until freshman year, when some stupid argument about student council elections had blown up into a friendship-ending fight. Looking back, I couldn't even remember what we'd been so angry about. But the thought of facing her now, knowing what her mother had done, made my stomach churn. You okay? Jenna was studying my face. You look like you're going to throw up. Before I could answer, my phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code was familiar, Stanford, California. Hello? I answered cautiously. Ms. Chen? This is David Kim from Stanford University's Office of Undergraduate Admissions. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. My heart stopped. Jenna's eyes went wide and she grabbed my arm. We've been contacted by your school district regarding some irregularities in your application materials, he continued. I'm calling because we'd like to schedule a phone interview to discuss your application in light of some new information we've received. New information? It appears the counselor recommendation we received may not have accurately reflected your qualifications or character. We're reopening your file for consideration, though I should mention that our incoming class is already full. However, we do occasionally have spots open up over the summer, and given the circumstances. He kept talking, but I couldn't process the words. Stanford was reconsidering my application. The school Sophie was supposed to attend in the fall, with a scholarship that should have been mine. Ms. Chen? Are you still there? Yes, I managed. Yes, I'm here. Excellent. Would Thursday at 2 p.m. work for a phone interview? I know this is short notice, but we're trying to address these situations as quickly as possible. Thursday. Tomorrow. The day after graduation. That would be perfect, I said, my voice barely steady. After I hung up, Jenna was practically bouncing. Stanford called you. They're reconsidering. This is incredible. But all I could think about was Sophie's text message. Whatever she wanted to tell me at Riverside Park, it was going to happen exactly 4 hours before the most important phone call of my life. The meeting with Sophie at Riverside Park was supposed to be at 3:30. I got there at 3:15, partly because I was anxious and partly because I wanted the tactical advantage of choosing where to sit. I picked a bench near the playground where we used to hang out freshman year, back when our biggest worry was whether Jake Morrison liked her or me better. She showed up exactly on time, which was so typically Sophie that it almost made me smile. Almost. She looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing what looked like the same clothes from yesterday's Instagram post about Stanford. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting down on the opposite end of the bench like I might bite her. "I wasn't sure you would." I wasn't sure I would either. We sat in awkward silence for maybe 30 seconds, watching a group of elementary kids chase each other around the monkey bars. Finally, Sophie took a shaky breath. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "About what my mom was doing to you. I swear to God, Sarah, I had no idea." I wanted to believe her. The problem was, I'd spent the last 18 hours replaying every interaction we'd had since freshman year, looking for signs. And there were things that didn't add up. "Really?" I turned to face her. "You didn't think it was weird that you got into Stanford when 3 other people from our school with better stats didn't?" "I thought I got lucky." I thought, she stopped, then started again. "Okay, there were things. Things that didn't make sense." "Like what?" Sophie pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself smaller. "Like how my mom always seemed to know exactly what was in other students' applications. She'd make these comments at dinner about how Sarah Chen thinks she's guaranteed to get into Harvard or Marcus Williams is going to be disappointed when he realizes his essay isn't as unique as he thinks. Stuff that felt mean, but I thought she was just being protective of me." My stomach tightened. "She talked about my Harvard application at your dinner table?" "More than once." "And when you started getting rejection letters, she seemed—" "I don't know. Not surprised exactly, but not sympathetic either. Like she was expecting it." A jogger passed by us, earbuds in, completely oblivious to the fact that he was witnessing a confession that could determine both our futures. I watched him disappear around the bend before I trusted myself to speak. "When did you start suspecting something was wrong?" Sophie was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. "Then, when Sam showed me the email Tuesday night. The one meant for him that got sent to you instead. He was going to delete it, pretend he never saw it, but I made him screenshot everything first." "You made him?" "Because I remembered something from junior year. My mom had this conversation with Mrs. Patterson about college recommendations, and she mentioned that guidance counselors could include confidential behavioral observations that students never got to see. She said it was one of the most powerful parts of the application because colleges trusted counselor assessments completely. The pieces were clicking together in a way that made me feel sick. So when you saw those emails, I realized she'd been weaponizing that trust. And I realized that if she was lying about you, she might be lying about other things too." Sophie's voice cracked. "So I told Sam to send everything to the district office. Anonymously." I stared at her. "You're the one who turned in your own mother?" "I couldn't let her destroy your life to help mine. Even if we're not friends anymore, even if you hate me, that's not how I want to get into college." The admission hung between us like a challenge. Sophie Henderson, the girl who'd been my biggest competition for 4 years, had just blown up her own future to save mine. And tomorrow at 2 p.m., I had a phone call that could determine whether her sacrifice meant anything at all. The silence stretched between us until it became unbearable. Sophie was crying now, not the dramatic kind of tears she'd always been good at in high school theater productions, but quiet, exhausted sobs that made her shoulders shake. "Stanford called me this morning," she said without looking up. "They're revoking my admission. And the scholarship." Her voice was barely audible. "They said there would be a formal investigation into whether I knew about my mother's actions, but that they couldn't allow me to enroll given the circumstances." I felt like I should say something, but what? "I'm sorry?" "Good? You deserve it?" Nothing felt right. "They're not just reviewing this year either," Sophie continued. "The state investigators told my mom yesterday that they're looking at every single student she's counseled since 2019. Every recommendation letter, every college acceptance, every scholarship." She finally looked at me, her face blotchy and red. "Do you know what that means?" "That a lot of people are about to find out their counselor screwed them over. It means they're going to find Marcus Williams' file." My blood went cold. Marcus had been a year ahead of us, graduated last spring. He'd been ranked second in his class with perfect test scores and early admission to MIT. Everyone thought he was a shoo-in for the National Merit Scholarship that came with full tuition coverage. Except he didn't get it. The scholarship had gone to Jessica Park instead, daughter of the district's head of facilities management. "Oh God," I whispered. "And Emma Rodriguez from 2 years ago. She was supposed to get into UCLA with that Hispanic Heritage Foundation scholarship. Remember how shocked everyone was when she ended up at community college instead?" I did remember. Emma had been devastated, completely blindsided by the rejection. She'd been so confident, had already ordered UCLA sweatshirts, started following her future roommate on Instagram. The scholarship had ultimately gone to Maria Santos, whose father was the high school's assistant principal. "How many others, Sophie?" "I don't know. But I spent all of last night going through my mom's files." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of a manila folder stuffed with papers. She kept copies of everything. Every manipulated recommendation, every strategic character assassination, every manufactured behavioral concern. It goes back at least 4 years, maybe more. My hands were shaking as I looked at the image. This wasn't just about me and Sophie anymore. This was about dozens of students whose entire life trajectories had been altered by one woman's systematic corruption. "There's something else," Sophie said, her voice getting smaller. "Something worse." I wasn't sure I could handle anything worse, but I nodded for her to continue. "The scholarship program that funded my Stanford admission? It's not just need-based like my mom told you. It's specifically reserved for students whose guidance counselors identify them as overcoming significant academic or behavioral challenges." Sophie's laugh was bitter and hollow. "She didn't just destroy your applications, Sarah. She falsified mine too. She created an entire fake narrative about my learning disabilities and social anxiety issues to qualify me for funding meant for students who actually struggle." The magnitude of it hit me like a physical blow. Mrs. Henderson hadn't just been playing favorites, she'd been running a full-scale fraud operation, manufacturing fake disadvantages for her own daughter while simultaneously creating fake problems for her daughter's competition. The investigators know, Sophie continued. They have documentation showing that none of the behavioral or academic challenges in my scholarship application actually exist in my school records. They're calling it systematic fraud with intent to defraud federal education programs. Federal programs. This wasn't just a school district issue anymore. Sophie, I said slowly, how much trouble is your mom in? She looked at me with eyes that seemed about 20 years older than they had been a week ago. My dad's lawyer says she could be looking at felony charges. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud the government. If they can prove the scholarship money was federal, she might be facing 10 to 15 years. 15 years in prison. For trying to help her daughter get into college. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Investigator Park. Can you come to the district office at 4:30 p.m. today? We have some additional questions about the scope of Mrs. Henderson's activities. I showed Sophie the message. She closed her eyes. They're going to ask you to testify, she said. In the criminal trial. Which meant in less than 24 hours, I'd gone from having my future destroyed to potentially being the star witness in a case that could send my former friend's mother to federal prison. The district office at 4:30 p.m. was nothing like the friendly administrative building I visited for honor roll certificates and scholarship paperwork over the years. Two unmarked cars sat in the parking lot, and through the windows I could see people in suits moving around with boxes of files and laptops. Investigator Park met me at the front door with Ms. Rodriguez and someone new, a woman with short gray hair and a badge clipped to her belt. Sarah, this is Agent Martinez from the FBI's white-collar crime unit, Park said as we walked toward a conference room. The federal government has taken interest in this case. FBI. The word made my knees weak. Why? Agent Martinez opened a thick folder and spread photos across the table, screenshots of emails, bank records, and what looked like financial documents. Because Mrs. Henderson's activities involved federal education funding programs. The scholarships that were fraudulently obtained total approximately $2.3 million over 4 years. I sank into a chair, staring at the numbers. $2 million? The Stanford scholarship alone was worth $180,000 over 4 years, Ms. Rodriguez explained. But it appears Mrs. Henderson orchestrated similar schemes for at least 15 other students whose parents had connections to the district. We're talking about systematic theft from programs designed to help genuinely disadvantaged students. Agent Martinez pulled out a different document, a bank statement with several highlighted entries. We also found evidence that Mrs. Henderson received payments from some of the families whose children benefited from her manipulation. The Sanchez's paid her $5,000 after their son got into Northwestern. The Patel family wrote her a $3,000 check labeled as a graduation gift after their daughter received the State University Honors Program scholarship. The room started spinning. This wasn't just about college admissions anymore. This was about money, bribes, and corruption that went far deeper than a mother trying to help her daughter. Did Sophie know? I asked. About the payments? Park shook his head. We don't believe so. But we do need to ask you about something else. He pulled up an email on his laptop and turned it toward me. This is from Mrs. Henderson's personal account to someone named Patricia Williams. Does that name sound familiar? I read the subject line, Marcus Williams MIT application, additional considerations. My stomach dropped. Patricia Williams is Marcus's aunt. She works in the district's financial aid office. According to this email chain from last March, Mrs. Henderson and Patricia Williams coordinated their efforts to redirect Marcus's National Merit Scholarship to Jessica Park, Agent Martinez said. Patricia provided confidential information about scholarship award timelines, and Mrs. Henderson timed her negative recommendation letters accordingly. The conspiracy was bigger than I'd imagined. It wasn't just Mrs. Henderson working alone, she'd built an entire network of district employees who were manipulating the system for their own family's benefit. How many people were involved? I asked. We're still investigating, but preliminary evidence suggests at least 6 district employees participated in various aspects of the scheme over the past 4 years, Park said. Counselors, administrative staff, even 2 teachers who provided false behavioral reports when requested. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Sarah, we need you to understand something. This case is likely going to trial, and your testimony will be crucial. You're the student who uncovered the evidence, and you have direct knowledge of Mrs. Henderson's methods and admissions. What does that mean, exactly? It means you'll probably need to testify in federal court, she said gently. About your interactions with Mrs. Henderson, about the impact her actions had on your college applications, and about the systematic nature of what she was doing. Federal court. Testifying against Mrs. Henderson while Sophie sat in the gallery, watching me help send her mother to prison. My phone buzzed with a text from Stanford, confirmed for tomorrow's interview at 2 p.m. Looking forward to speaking with you about your application. In 18 hours, I could be getting my dream back. But the cost kept getting higher. I didn't sleep at all Wednesday night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Agent Martinez's evidence photos, bank statements, email chains, that growing list of names of students whose lives had been quietly destroyed over 4 years. By 4 a.m., I'd given up pretending and was sitting at my desk, staring at the question Stanford had emailed me for today's interview. Tell us about a time you overcame a significant challenge. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. At 6:30 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown California number. Sarah? This is David Kim from Stanford again. I'm terribly sorry to call so early, but we've had a development regarding your interview today. My heart stopped. What kind of development? We received a call yesterday evening from the FBI regarding our investigation into Mrs. Henderson's activities. It appears that several other universities are coordinating with federal investigators to review potentially affected applications simultaneously. His voice was careful, professional. We're going to need to postpone your interview until after the federal investigation concludes. How long will that take? We're not sure. Possibly several months. Several months. By then, the fall semester would already be started. Housing would be assigned. My entire senior class would be halfway through their first semester of college while I sat in legal limbo, waiting to find out if my sabotaged applications could be salvaged. Mr. Kim, I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice, what does this mean for my admission chances? There was a pause. I wish I could give you a definitive answer, Sarah. What I can tell you is that Stanford takes these situations very seriously. If our investigation confirms that your original application was misrepresented by your counselor, we will absolutely reconsider your admission for the spring semester. Spring semester. 6 months later than everyone else. 6 months behind. After I hung up, I just sat there in my pajamas, watching the sun come up through my bedroom window. Graduation was in 4 hours. Tonight, my parents were throwing a party for relatives who'd driven in from 3 states to celebrate their daughter, the valedictorian, who was supposedly going to take a gap year to explore her options. They still didn't know the real reason I wasn't heading to college in the fall. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that my dad hired a lawyer for my mom. Her arraignment is scheduled for next Friday. The lawyer said the prosecutor is willing to discuss a plea deal if she provides information about other people involved. Other people involved. More names, more ruined lives, more families about to be destroyed. Another text came through, this one from Marcus Williams himself. Sarah, heard through the grapevine you're the one who exposed Henderson. Thank you. I know it doesn't fix what happened to either of us, but at least now I know why MIT rejected me. My parents are talking to a lawyer about suing the district. Then Jenna, OMG, did you see? Channel 7 is doing a live broadcast from school before graduation. They want to interview affected students. Then my mom, texting from downstairs, honey, there are news trucks in our driveway. Come down when you're ready, but maybe use the back door if you want to avoid them. News trucks. At my house. For hours before I had to give a valedictorian speech to a crowd that would include reporters, FBI agents, and probably half the district employees who were about to be investigated for conspiracy. I pulled up the draft of my speech on my laptop, the same generic thing about dreams and perseverance and bright futures that I'd been rewriting for weeks. It felt completely meaningless now. How was I supposed to stand up there and talk about achieving your goals when my own future was tied up in federal court? How was I supposed to inspire my classmates when I didn't even know if I'd be in college next year? My phone rang again. This time it was Principal Morrison. Sarah, I need to ask you a favor, he said without preamble. The media attention around today's ceremony is going to be intense. I know you're scheduled to speak as valedictorian, but given your connection to the ongoing investigation, I'm wondering if you'd be comfortable keeping your remarks focused on celebrating your classmates rather than other topics. Are you asking me to avoid mentioning Mrs. Henderson? I'm asking you to remember that there are 847 other graduating seniors who deserve to have their moment today. This is their day too. After I hung up, I deleted my entire speech and started typing something new. Because Morrison was right, this was bigger than just me now. And my classmates deserve to know exactly what had been happening to students at Lincoln High for the past 4 years. Whether the administration wanted them to know or not. The auditorium was packed by 2 p.m., an hour before the ceremony was supposed to start. Through the backstage curtains, I could see news cameras positioned along the walls and unfamiliar faces scattered throughout the crowd, reporters, investigators, and probably lawyers representing half the families in our district. My new speech was folded in my sweaty palm, all 3 pages of it. I'd thrown out everything about dreams and bright futures and written something completely different. Something true. Sarah. Principal Morrison appeared beside me, his face grim. We need to talk. He led me to his office, where Agent Martinez was waiting with a man I didn't recognize wearing an expensive suit. This is David Walsh, the district's legal counsel, Morrison said. He's here about your speech. Walsh opened a briefcase and pulled out what looked like a contract. Miss Chen, given the ongoing federal investigation, we need you to sign this agreement stating that you won't discuss any details of Mrs. Henderson's case during today's ceremony. I stared at the document. You want me to sign a gag order? We want to protect the integrity of the investigation, Agent Martinez said carefully. Anything you say publicly today could potentially compromise the federal case. Or, I said, looking directly at Walsh, you're worried I'm going to tell 847 graduating seniors and their families exactly how corrupt this district is. Morrison's face flushed. Sarah, that's not. Did you know? I interrupted. About Mrs. Henderson, about the payments, about any of it? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Jesus Christ, I whispered. You all knew. Walsh cleared his throat. Miss Chen, if you don't sign this agreement, we'll have no choice but to cancel your speaking slot and have the salutatorian deliver remarks instead. Fine, I said, standing up. Do that. But as I reached the door, Agent Martinez spoke up. Actually, Mr. Walsh, I don't think you can do that. Everyone turned to look at her. She was smiling, but it wasn't a friendly expression. Miss Chen is a key witness in a federal investigation. Any attempt to silence or retaliate against her could be construed as witness intimidation, which is a felony. She looked directly at Walsh. I'd hate for this district to face additional federal charges. The room went dead quiet. Sarah, Morrison said finally, his voice strained, please. Just, be careful what you say up there. 20 minutes later, I was standing at the podium looking out at nearly 2,000 people. The first few rows were filled with my classmates in their blue caps and gowns, most of them looking confused about why there were so many adults with cameras and notebooks scattered throughout the audience. I unfolded my speech and looked directly into the news cameras. For years ago, we started high school believing that hard work and talent would determine our futures, I began. We believed that the adults in charge of guiding us were trustworthy. We believed the system was fair. In the front row, I could see Jenna's eyes go wide. Marcus, who'd come back for graduation, was leaning forward in his seat. Sophie wasn't there, I'd heard her family had left town yesterday. Today, I want to tell you about what really determines your future at Lincoln High School. It's not your GPA or your test scores or how many volunteer hours you log. It's whether your parents work for the district. It's whether your family can afford to write checks labeled as graduation gifts. It's whether your guidance counselor decides you deserve opportunities or decides to systematically destroy them. Principal Morrison was making frantic hand gestures from the side of the stage, but I kept going. 23 students from our class alone were affected by fraudulent college recommendations. Some of you are sitting here today thinking you weren't smart enough for your dream schools. You were wrong. You were sabotaged. The murmur from the audience was getting louder. Parents were pulling out phones, recording everything. The news cameras were zooming in on my face. And to the district administrators watching this, I said, looking directly at Morrison, your corruption ends now. The silence after I finished speaking was deafening. For maybe 10 seconds, 2,000 people just stared at me while I stood there gripping the podium, my heart hammering so hard I was sure the microphone would pick it up. Then everything erupted at once. Parents started shouting questions. Students were turning in their seats, looking confused and angry. Camera flashes went off like strobe lights. Principal Morrison was speedwalking toward the stage, his face purple with rage, while Agent Martinez stood up from her seat in the back, speaking rapidly into her phone. Sarah Chen. A reporter's voice cut through the chaos. Can you tell us how many families received fraudulent scholarships? Before I could answer, Morrison had reached the microphone. Thank you, Sarah. Let's continue with the ceremony, Anne. 17 families, I said, leaning back toward the mic, at least $2.3 million in stolen federal funding over 4 years. The number hit the crowd like a bomb. More shouting, more camera clicks, more parents pulling out their phones to call lawyers. I could see Mrs. Williams, Marcus's mom, standing up in the middle of the auditorium, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood why her son was at community college instead of MIT. Morrison grabbed my arm. Get off the stage. Now. Don't touch her. Agent Martinez's voice boomed across the auditorium as she pushed through the crowd. Miss Chen is under federal protection as a key witness. The absurdity of it hit me all at once. I was 18 years old, standing on a stage in a graduation cap, being protected by the FBI from my own principal while news cameras broadcast my school's corruption scandal live on local television. And I started laughing. Not happy laughter, the kind of hysterical, exhausted laughter that comes when your entire world has collapsed and rebuilt itself so many times in 1 week that nothing feels real anymore. Sarah. A familiar voice made me stop. My mom was standing in the aisle, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not disappointment or anger, but something like pride mixed with terror. Come down from there, honey. I walked down the stage steps on shaking legs, past Morrison's glare and Agent Martinez's protective stance, straight to my parents. Dad wrapped me in a hug that smelled like his cologne and Mom's coffee from this morning. Are you okay? Mom whispered. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know anything anymore. Miss Chen. David Walsh appeared beside us, his earlier smugness completely gone. We need to discuss your safety. There are going to be significant repercussions from what you just disclosed. What kind of repercussions? Agent Martinez joined our circle. The families who benefited from Mrs. Henderson's scheme have a lot to lose if this goes to trial. Some of them have significant financial resources and political connections. We're recommending that you and your family consider protective measures. Protective measures. Like witness protection. Like my decision to expose the truth had just put my entire family in danger. My phone, which had been buzzing nonstop in my pocket, finally rang with a call I recognized. Stanford. I have to take this, I said, stepping away from the group. Miss Chen, this is David Kim again. I've been watching the news coverage of your graduation ceremony. His voice was different now, urgent, almost excited. Can you be available for a conference call in 1 hour? Our Dean of Admissions wants to speak with you directly. About what? About immediate admission for fall semester. We're prepared to offer you a full scholarship and expedited enrollment if you're interested. I looked around at the chaos I'd created, reporters interviewing crying parents, students demanding answers from administrators, FBI agents taking notes on everything. Morrison was surrounded by what looked like lawyers and district officials, all of them gesturing frantically. Mr. Kim, I said, I think I need to stay here for a while. There's still work to do. Because standing there, watching 17 families finally learn the truth about what had happened to their children, I realized something important. This wasn't just about getting into college anymore. This was about making sure Mrs. Henderson's scheme never happened to anyone else. And that was going to take more than just my testimony. The call with Stanford ended with me agreeing to defer their offer until spring semester. By the time I hung up, the auditorium had been cleared except for a few stragglers and what looked like a crime scene investigation team photographing the stage setup. Agent Martinez found me sitting in the empty bleachers, still wearing my cap and gown. Your speech was brave, she said, settling beside me. Also incredibly stupid from a legal standpoint. Did I mess up the case? Actually, you might have just made it stronger. 3 more families have already contacted our tip line in the past hour. Parents who suspected something was wrong with their kids' rejections but didn't know who to call. She showed me her phone, which was lighting up with notifications. We now have evidence dating back to 2018. 2018, that meant Mrs. Henderson had been doing this for at least 6 years, not 4. How many students? How many stolen futures? There's something else you should know, Martinez continued. Mrs. Henderson wasn't working alone within the guidance department. We arrested her colleague, Mrs. Patricia Vance, an hour ago. My stomach dropped. Mrs. Vance had been my guidance counselor sophomore year, before I'd been reassigned to Mrs. Henderson for better college planning support. I'd always wondered why the switch happened so suddenly. She was running a parallel operation with students assigned to her caseload. Different methods, same results, manipulating recommendations to benefit connected families while sabotaging competition. Martinez pulled out a tablet showing booking photos. We also have warrants out for the district's college placement coordinator and 2 assistant principals. The scope kept expanding. This wasn't just corruption, it was a systematic dismantling of merit-based education that had been operating right under everyone's noses for years. Agent Martinez, I said carefully, what happens to the students who got into college because of this? The ones who were already enrolled, already started their freshman year? Her expression darkened. That's the complicated part. Universities are going to have to decide case by case whether to revoke admissions. Some kids genuinely qualified for their spots and just had parents who made bad choices. Others. She shrugged. Their entire academic record might have been manufactured. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Emma Rodriguez. I heard what you did today. I want to help. Can we talk? Emma, the student who lost her UCLA scholarship 3 years ago. Then another message, this one from a number I recognized. Sarah, it's Marcus. My parents want to file a class action lawsuit against the district. They need other families to join. Can you help us contact people? A class action lawsuit. That would mean depositions, court appearances, months, or maybe years of legal proceedings. It would also mean forcing every affected family to relive the worst disappointment of their children's lives, but this time with the knowledge that it had been completely preventable. Before I could respond, my mom appeared at the end of the bleacher row. Sarah, honey? There are reporters outside wanting to interview you. And Channel 7 wants to know if you'd be willing to do a feature story about student advocacy. Student advocacy. Is that what I become? 24 hours ago, I just wanted to expose Mrs. Henderson for what she'd done to me. Now I was apparently the face of an education reform movement I'd never intended to start. Mom, I said, I think we're going to need a lawyer too. As if summoned by my words, a woman in a sharp gray suit approached us from across the auditorium floor. Miss Chen? I'm Rebecca Torres, attorney with the Education Justice Foundation. We specialize in cases involving institutional fraud and student rights violations. She handed me a business card. We'd like to discuss representing you and other affected families pro bono. Pro bono. Which meant someone thought this case was important enough to work for free. Or big enough to generate the kind of publicity that made free work worthwhile. There's one more thing, Agent Martinez said quietly, checking her phone. Mrs. Henderson's lawyer called 20 minutes ago. She wants to make a deal. Mrs. Henderson's plea hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 9 a.m. I sat in the federal courthouse gallery wearing the same navy dress I'd planned to wear for my Harvard interview, watching the woman who destroyed my senior year shuffle to the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older. When she glanced back at the gallery, her eyes found mine for just a second before darting away. Sophie wasn't there. I'd heard from Jenna that the Henderson family had moved to Phoenix to stay with relatives. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, Mrs. Henderson has agreed to plead guilty to 18 counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy to defraud federal education programs. In exchange for her cooperation in identifying other participants in the scheme, the government recommends a sentence of 4 years in federal prison with restitution of $2.3 million to affected scholarship programs. 4 years. It felt simultaneously like too much and not nearly enough. But it was the next part that made everything worth it. Mrs. Henderson's cooperation has led to the identification of 47 affected students dating back to 2016, the prosecutor continued. The Department of Education has established a remediation fund to assist these students with college application fees, tutoring for entrance exams, and emergency financial aid for those who had to alter their education plans. 47 students. I thought about Emma Rodriguez, about Marcus Williams, about all the kids whose names I'd never know who'd spent years thinking they weren't good enough, weren't smart enough, weren't worthy of their dreams. After the hearing, Agent Martinez found me in the courthouse hallway. It's over, Sarah. The investigation, the uncertainty, you can move forward now. She was right. Stanford had confirmed my spring admission with a full scholarship. Harvard had reopened my application for next fall. Even MIT had reached out about a special transfer program for students affected by counselor fraud. I had options I'd never dreamed of 6 months ago. But standing there in that courthouse, watching Mrs. Henderson disappear into custody, I realized something important had changed in me. The girl who'd started senior year with a carefully planned path to Harvard was gone. In her place was someone who understood that the most important victories aren't the ones you win for yourself. 3 months later, I was sitting in a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C., testifying before the House Subcommittee on Education about the need for federal oversight of high school guidance counseling programs. The Education Justice Foundation had flown me out to speak about H.R. 2847, the Student Advocacy and Counselor Accountability Act. The Lincoln High case isn't an isolated incident, I told the committee, looking directly into C-SPAN's cameras. Our investigation identified similar schemes in 63 districts across 12 states. This is a systemic problem that requires a systematic solution. After my testimony, Congressman Williams from Ohio shook my hand. You know, Miss Chen, you've probably done more to reform American education in the past 6 months than most people do in entire careers. Have you ever considered public service? I smiled, thinking about my acceptance letter from Stanford's public policy program, about the internship offer from the Department of Education, about the 46 other students who were now starting their freshman years at colleges they'd never thought possible. Actually, I said, I think I already have. Sometimes the most important lessons happen outside the classroom. And sometimes the best way to secure your own future is to make sure everyone else has the chance to chase theirs too. That's a lesson no guidance counselor could have taught me, and one I'll never forget.